The crystal champagne flute shattered against the saloon's wooden floor as Magnolia. Whitmore's laugh cut through the smoky air like a blade. 10 sons? She repeated, her emerald eyes glittering with malicious amusement. You think a worthless giant like you could father 10 sons? Caspian Ironwood's massive frame filled the doorway, his 7-foot stature casting shadows across the entire gambling hall. Dust from the cattle drive still clung to his weathered leather chaps, and his steel-gray eyes fixed on the railroad heiress who had just publicly humiliated him in front of half of Copper Creek's elite. Ma'am, I was simply asking for your hand. In marriage, Caspian's voice rumbled like distant thunder. Nothing more, nothing less. Magnolia's silk bustle rustled as she stepped closer, her pale fingers trailing along the mahogany bar. At 26, she was the wealthiest unmarried woman in 3 counties. Inheriting her father's railroad empire after his death 2 years prior, her raven-black hair was piled high in the latest Eastern fashion, and her burgundy dress cost more than most families saw in a year. Marriage? She threw back her head and laughed again. To a cattle-driving nobody who smells like manure and sweat. Darling, I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man between here and San Francisco. The saloon fell silent. Even the piano players stopped mid-note. Caspian removed his black Stetson, his calloused fingers working the brim. Then what would it take, Miss Whitmore? What would prove I'm worthy of you? Magnolia's eyes narrowed, calculating. She had rejected 17 marriage proposals in the past year alone, senators' sons, oil barons, cattle kings. But this giant cowboy intrigued her with his quiet confidence and the way he didn't cower under her sharp tongue like the others. 10 sons, she declared, her voice carrying across the hushed room. Give me 10 strong sons who can carry on my father's empire, and maybe, just maybe, I'll consider you worth more than the dirt on my boots. The crowd gasped. Several men chuckled nervously. Judge Morrison nearly choked on his whiskey, but Caspian simply nodded, placing his hat back. On his head, 10 sons it is, ma'am. I accept your challenge. Accept? Magnolia's composure cracked slightly. She had expected him to storm out, humiliated. You can't be serious. Deadly serious. Caspian's weathered hands rested on his gun belt.
Oh, but I have conditions of my own.
The heiress raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. You, making conditions? This should be entertaining. When I give you those 10 sons, you'll marry me proper. Church wedding, white dress, the whole affair. And you'll never speak down to another soul the way you just spoke to me. Magnolia's laugh was sharp as broken glass. And if you fail, then I'll leave Copper Creek forever and never darken your doorstep again. She extended one gloved hand. Deal, cowboy. You have 1 year. As their hands clasped, electricity shot between them, something neither expected. Magnolia jerked her hand back as if burned, while Caspian's eyes sparked with something dangerous and promising. 1 year, he repeated, tipping his hat. Best start preparing that wedding dress, Miss Whitmore. He turned and walked out, his spurs jingling against the floorboards, leaving behind a saloon full of stunned faces and one very shaken railroad heiress who suddenly wondered what she had just agreed to. 3 days later, Magnolia's morning routine shattered when her housemaid Cordelia burst into the master bedroom carrying an enormous bouquet of wild prairie roses. Miss Magnolia, these just arrived with a note. Magnolia snatched the card with trembling fingers, in bold masculine handwriting. For the mother of my future sons, day 1 of our courtship. CI courtship? Kata? Magnolia shrieked, crushing the note. The arrogant fool thinks he's courting me. But even as she spoke, her fingers unconsciously touched the velvet petals. No man had ever brought her wild flowers before, only expensive hothouse arrangements that looked pretty but had no soul. That afternoon, while reviewing railroad contracts in her mahogany-paneled study, another disruption arrived. This time, Caspian himself appeared at her front door, cleaned up and wearing his finest black suit. His hair was slicked back, and he'd trimmed his beard, revealing sharp cheekbones that made her pulse quicken against her will. Miss Whitmore, he said, hat in hand, I've come to escort you to dinner. I haven't agreed to any dinner. Part of the courtship process, ma'am. Can't make sons without proper courting first. Heat flooded Magnolia's cheeks. You vulgar, presumptuous, 7. A clock at Morrison's hotel. Caspian interrupted calmly. Or something pretty. He turned to leave, then paused. And Magnolia, you might want to practice saying yes to me. You'll be doing it a lot over the next year. That evening, despite every rational thought screaming against it, Magnolia found herself dressed in her finest blue silk gown, sitting across from Caspian in Morrison's hotel's elegant dining room. He had reserved the entire private alcove, complete with candles and a string quartet. This must have cost a fortune, she said, trying to maintain her composure. Worth every penny. Caspian's eyes never left her face. Nothing's too good for my future bride, future bride. Magnolia's fork clattered against her plate. You have a wager, nothing more. Call it what you want. I know what I see when I look at you. And what's that? Caspian leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate rumble. A lonely woman pretending to be made of ice, when underneath, she's burning for someone to see the real her. Magnolia's breath caught. You don't know anything about me? I know you inherited your father's empire at 24 and have been fighting tooth and nail to keep it ever since. I know every man who's proposed has only wanted your money, not you. I know you're scared to death that nobody will ever love you for who you really are. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. Stop. I know you've been alone in that big house every night for 2 years, wondering if this is all there is to life. Stop it. Caspian reached across the table and gently took her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. I'm not after your money, Magnolia. I've got my own spread, my own cattle. What I want is you, the real you, not the Ice Queen act. For a moment, her mask slipped entirely. Vulnerability flashed in her green eyes before she yanked her hand away and stood abruptly. This dinner is over. But as she hurried toward the door, Caspian's voice followed her. I'll see you tomorrow, sweetheart. This is just the beginning. Outside in her carriage, Magnolia pressed her back against the velvet seat, her heart pounding. No man had ever seen through her defenses so easily. It terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The next morning brought another surprise. Caspian waiting in her garden at dawn, leading to saddled horses. What are you doing here so early? Magnolia demanded from her bedroom window, still in her silk nightgown. Taking you riding? Get dressed. I have appointments. Cancel them? His grin was pure mischief, unless you're afraid to spend time alone with me. 20 minutes later, she found herself galloping across the open prairie beside him, her hair streaming free from its pins for the first time in years. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wildflowers and freedom. Where are we going? She called over the thunder of hooves. You'll see. They rode for an hour until Caspian led them to a hidden valley she'd never seen before, despite owning the land. A crystal-clear stream meandered through wildflower meadows, and ancient oak trees provided cool shade. It's beautiful, Magnolia breathed, dismounting. My secret place, Caspian said, tying the horses to a low branch. Thought you should see it before it becomes ours. Ours. But the protest lacked her usual fire. They sat by the stream. And for the first time in years, Magnolia felt herself truly relaxing. Caspian told her stories of his childhood, how he'd been orphaned at 12 and raised himself building his ranch from nothing through sheer determination. Why 10 sons? He asked suddenly. Magnolia's fingers trailed in the cool water. My father always said sons were the only legacy that mattered. Daughters were just disappointments who couldn't carry on the family name. That's the biggest load of bull I've ever heard. She looked up sharply. Excuse me? You've built that railroad empire into something twice what your father left. You're smarter, tougher, and more capable than any son could be. Caspian's eyes blazed with conviction. Any man would be lucky to have you as his legacy. Something cracked inside Magnolia's chest. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. I used to dream of having a dozen children, she whispered. Sons, daughters, didn't matter. I just wanted family. People who loved me just because I existed. What changed? Reality. Men only see dollar signs when they look at me. I learned that demanding the impossible keeps them at arm's length. Caspian moved closer on the blanket they'd spread. If someone gave you exactly what you demanded, impossible. His hand cupped her face gently. What if I could give you 10 sons who would love you unconditionally? What if I could give you the family you've always dreamed of? Magnolia's breath hitched. You're talking nonsense. Am I? His thumb traced her cheekbone. Look me in the eyes and tell me you don't feel this thing between us. She tried to look away but couldn't. Connection was undeniable, electric, consuming, terrifying. I feel it, she whispered. Then trust me. Let me prove that not all men are after your money. Before she could respond, his lips captured hers in a kiss that sent fire racing through her veins. Every wall she'd built around her heart began to crumble as she melted against him. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. This is insane, Magnolia gasped. Sometimes the best things are. Caspian's forehead rested against hers. Give us a chance, Magnolia. A real chance. Looking into his honest gray eyes, she made a decision that would change everything. All right, she whispered. But if you break my heart, I'll destroy you. His smile was brilliant as the sun. Deal, but fair warning, I'm planning to love you so hard, you'll never want to let me go. As they rode back toward town, Magnolia realized she was already falling for the impossible cowboy, who saw straight through to her soul. Summer blazed across the prairie as Caspian's courtship intensified. Every day brought new surprises: sunrise picnics, midnight rides under star-filled skies, long conversations that lasted until dawn. Slowly, methodically, he dismantled every defense Magnolia had built around her heart. The whole town's talking, Cordelia whispered one morning as she brushed Magnolia's hair. They say you're glowing like a woman in love. Magnolia caught her own reflection in the mirror. It was true. Her cheeks held a perpetual blush. Her eyes sparkled with life. She smiled more in these past weeks than she had in years. Don't be ridiculous, she murmured. But her heart wasn't in the denial. That afternoon, Caspian appeared at her office with a basket and that devastating grin she'd grown to love. Business can wait, he announced. We're going swimming. Swimming? I don't swim. Today you'll learn. An hour later, Magnolia found herself waist-deep in the cool waters of Hidden Lake. Shrieking with laughter as Caspian splashed her, her expensive dress was ruined. Her hair hung in dripping tendrils, and she'd never been happier. You're completely mad. She gasped, launching herself at him in retaliation. He caught her icily, his strong arms encircling her waist. Crazy about you, he murmured against her ear. The playfulness shifted to something deeper as their eyes met. Water droplets clung to his dark lashes, and Magnolia felt herself drowning in his steady gaze. Caspian, ... double quotes, she breathed. I love you, he said simply. Not your money, not your status, you. The woman who argues with me, challenges me, makes me. Want to be better than I am? Tears mixed with lake water on her cheeks. I love you too. God help me, but I love you too. Their kiss was desperate, passionate, full of months of pent-up longing. When they finally came up for air, both knew there was no going back. That evening, as they sat on her front porch sharing sweet tea and stolen glances, Magnolia voiced the fear that had been growing in her heart. What if I can't give you children at all? What if my body won't cooperate? Caspian set down his glass and turned to face her fully. Then we'll love each other just the same. Children would be a blessing, but you're all I need. But the wager was your way of protecting yourself. I understand that now. His fingers intertwined with hers. Whether we have 10 children or none, whether they're sons or daughters, I want to spend my life loving you. The whole town thinks you're only after 10 sons. Caspian chuckled. Let me tell you what I really want. His voice dropped to that intimate rumble that made her pulse race. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the next 50 years. I want to see you round with our children, to hold your hand while you bring new life into this world. I want to grow old watching you boss around our grandchildren. If they're all daughters, then I'll be the luckiest man alive, surrounded by beautiful women, just like their mother. Magnolia's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. Marry me, she whispered. What? You heard me? Marry me, Caspian Ironwood. Tomorrow, next week, I don't care when. Just marry me before I lose my nerve. His whoop of joy echoed across the prairie as he swept her into his arms and spun her around the porch. "Yes, hell yes, I'll marry you." As he set her down, both were laughing and crying at the same time. "There's just one thing," Magnolia said, suddenly serious. "Anything. I want to be a real wife to you, in every way." Her cheeks flamed, but she held his gaze. "I want to give you children because I love you, not because of some foolish wager." Caspian's eyes darkened with desire and love. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him with all the passion she'd kept locked away for 26 years. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. 2 weeks, Caspian said roughly. "I need 2 weeks, too. Build us a proper wedding that's worthy of you." 2 weeks, she agreed. "But Caspian, I'm not waiting any longer than that." His smile was pure male satisfaction. "Yes, ma'am." "Wouldn't dream of making you wait." The entire town of Copper Creek turned out for the wedding of the century. The ceremony took place in Magnolia's rose garden, transformed into a fairy tale setting with white silk ribbons, cascading flowers, and hundreds of glowing lanterns. Magnolia walked down the petal-strewn aisle in her grandmother's wedding dress, ivory satin and French lace that made her look like an angel. But it was the expression on Caspian's face that stole everyone's breath. The big, tough cowboy had tears streaming down his cheeks as he watched his bride approach. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered when she reached him. "And you're the most handsome groom in the territory," she replied. Straightening his black tie with trembling fingers, Judge Morrison performed the ceremony, his voice carrying across the hushed garden. "Do you, Caspian, Ironwood, take Magnolia to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love, honor, and cherish, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do, forever and always." "And do you, Magnolia Whitmore, take Caspian as your lawfully wedded husband, to love, honor, and cherish, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" Magnolia's voice rang clear and strong. "I do. With all my heart, you may kiss your bride." Caspian's kiss was tender, reverent, full of promise for their future together. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but the newlyweds only had eyes for each other. Their wedding night was everything Magnolia had dreamed and more. Caspian was gentle, patient, worshipful as he showed her the depths of physical love. Dawn, she was thoroughly ruined for any other man. Not that she wanted anyone else. "No regrets?" Caspian asked as they lay entwined in the morning light. "Only that we waited so long," Magnolia murmured against his chest. 6 weeks later, she woke with familiar nausea and knew their first child was already growing within her. Caspian's whoop of joy could be heard 3 counties over when she told him. "Boy or girl?" he asked. His large hand splayed protectively over her still flat belly. "Does it matter?" "Not one bit, as long as they're healthy and look like they're beautiful." Mama. 9 months later, Magnolia gave birth to twin boys, Jasper and Jeremiah Ironwood. 2 years after that came Gideon, followed by Augustus, then another set of twins, Phoenix and Sterling. 6 sons. Magnolia panted after delivering the twins during a fierce thunderstorm. "More than halfway to your goal?" Caspian kissed her sweat-dampened forehead. "Our goal. And sweetheart, you could stop right now, and I'd be the happiest man alive." But Magnolia wasn't done. She'd discovered she loved being pregnant, loved nursing her babies, loved watching Caspian with their children. He was an amazing father, patient, playful, teaching them to ride and rope and be gentlemen. 2 years later came Theron, then Matthias, and finally, during a gentle spring rain, little Evander completed their family. 10 sons, just as Magnolia had demanded in that long-ago saloon, Caspian asked, as he cradled their newest son, while their other 9 boys gathered. "Around the bed? Was I worth the wait?" Magnolia looked around at her chaotic, beautiful family, her husband's weathered face soft with love. Her sons ranging from 15 years old down to minutes old, all healthy and strong and perfect.
"Now you were worth everything,"
she whispered. "You gave me exactly what I demanded and so much more." "Was that?" a love that lasts forever. 10 years had passed since little Evander's birth, and the Ironwood Ranch had become legendary throughout the territory. The sprawling property buzzed with constant activity as 10 energetic boys grew into young men under their parents' loving guidance. Magnolia stood on the front porch of their expanded home, watching Caspian work with their older sons in the corral. At 46, she was more beautiful than ever. Motherhood had softened her sharp edges while adding a warm glow to her features. Her hair, now streaked with silver, was pulled back in a practical bun, and her simple blue dress bore evidence. Of her busy life as a ranch wife and mother, Mama 10-year-old Evander came running up, his clothes covered in mud from head to toe. "Papa says I can start breaking horses next year. Does he now?" Magnolia smiled, ruffling his dark hair that was identical to his father's. "Does Mama say about that? I need to prove I can stay on Buttercup first?" Evander sighed dramatically. Their oldest, 25-year-old Jasper, approached with his twin Jeremiah. Both had inherited their father's impressive height and their mother's keen intelligence. Jasper ran the business side of the ranch, while Jeremiah managed the cattle operations. "Ma, we need to talk about expanding into the northern pastures," Jasper said, his voice serious beyond his years. "The railroad wants to negotiate a new contract." Magnolia's eyes sparkled with pride. Her sons had grown into remarkable men, each unique, but all sharing their parents' strong moral compass and work ethic. 23-year-old Gideon was studying law, planning to be the family's legal counsel. 21-year-old Augustus had a gift with horses that bordered on magical. The 19-year-old twins, Phoenix and Sterling, were polar opposites. Phoenix loved books and numbers, while Sterling lived for adventure and danger. 17-year-old Theron showed artistic talent that amazed everyone, while 15-year-old Matthias had inherited his mother's head for business, and little Evander, their baby, seemed destined to be a natural leader like his father. "The northern expansion can wait," Magnolia decided. "Your father and I have something more important to discuss with all of you." That evening, after a dinner that required 3 tables to seat everyone, Caspian stood and cleared his throat. "Boys, your mother and I have an announcement." 10 pairs of eyes ranging from steel gray like their father's to green like their mother's focused on their parents with interest. "After 26 years of marriage and raising you wild bunch," Caspian grinned, "we've decided it's time for your old folks to take a step back." Murmurs of confusion rippled around the tables. Magnolia stood beside her husband, her hand finding his automatically. "What your father means is that we're ready to let you boys run the ranch and the railroad. We want to travel, see the world we never got to explore because we were too busy raising you." "You're not dying, are you?" Matthias asked, his young face worried. "Heavens no," Magnolia laughed. "We're planning to live another 40 years at least. We just want to spend some of those years alone together the way couples should." Jasper nodded slowly. "You've earned it. More than earned it. But we'll always come back here," Caspian added firmly. "This is home, is where our hearts are." 6 months later, Magnolia and Caspian stood on the deck of a steamship bound for Europe, watching the American coastline fade into the distance. At 55, Caspian was still impressively handsome, his hair silver, but his body strong from decades of ranch work. Magnolia, at 52, had aged like fine wine, more beautiful and confident with each passing year. "Any regrets about leaving the boys?" Caspian asked, his arm around her waist. "None whatsoever. They're grown men now, perfectly capable of managing without us hovering." Magnolia leaned into his familiar warmth. "Besides, I have plans for you, Caspian Ironwood." "What kind of plans?" Her smile was pure mischief, the kind that involves hotel rooms in Paris, gondola rides in Venice, and absolutely no interruptions from sons asking where they put their clean socks. Caspian's laughter rumbled through his chest. "Sounds perfect. Though I have to ask, after 10 sons, do you ever wish we'd had daughters too?" Magnolia considered this seriously. "Sometimes. But then I remember that someday our boys will marry wonderful women, and I'll have daughters-in-law to spoil. And granddaughters to teach everything I know about handling stubborn men. Granddaughters, think any of them will be as beautiful and headstrong as their grandmother? God help their future husbands if they are." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the endless ocean stretch before them. 30 years ago, Magnolia had been a bitter, lonely woman, convinced that love was just another business transaction. Now she was embarking on the adventure of a lifetime with her best friend, greatest love, and the father of her children. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing past the Ice Queen act. For giving me 10 amazing sons. For loving me exactly as I am." Her voice grew soft with emotion. "For proving that fairy tales can come true." Caspian turned her in his arms, his eyes still holding that same intensity that had captured her heart decades ago. "Thank you for taking a chance on a worthless cowboy. You were never worthless. You were exactly what I needed, even when I was too stubborn to admit it." As the ship sailed toward new horizons, Magnolia and Caspian began the next chapter of their extraordinary love story 20-5 years later. The Ironwood Ranch had grown into a sprawling empire that stretched across 3 states. But on this particular autumn evening, it buzzed with a different kind of energy as 3 generations gathered for Magnolia and Caspian's golden wedding anniversary at 77. Magnolia moved with the same grace she'd possessed as a young woman, though her hair was now snow white and her face mapped with laugh lines earned through decades of joy. She sat in her favorite rocking chair on the expanded front porch, surrounded by a sea of grandchildren ranging from toddlers to teenagers. "Tell us the story again, Grandmama," demanded 8-year-old Lily, Jasper's youngest daughter. "About how Grandpapa won your heart, yeah," chorused a dozen young voices. "Tell us about the 10 sons." Magnolia's eyes twinkled as she glanced toward the corral where Caspian, now 80, still cut an impressive figure as he demonstrated roping techniques to his grandsons. Time had silvered his hair and lined his face, but his shoulders remained broad, and his voice still carried that same commanding presence that had first captivated her. "Well," Magnolia began, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of a story told many times, "it all started with a foolish wager and a woman too proud for her own good." As she wove the familiar tale, her 10 sons, now men ranging from 45 to 35, gathered around with their wives and children. Jasper sat with his wife Caroline and their 4 children. Jeremiah's wife Margaret bounced their twin babies, while their 3 older kids listened intently. Gideon, now a respected judge, held hands with his wife Ruth as their 5 children pressed closer to hear their grandmother's words. Augustus had married Alina, a Spanish beauty who'd tamed his wild heart, and their 3 children had inherited their mother's dark eyes and their grandfather's way with horses. The twins, Phoenix and Sterling, had both found love. Phoenix with a schoolteacher named Grace, who appreciated his gentle soul. Sterling with a fiery redhead named Catherine, who could match his adventurous spirit. Theron's artistic talents had made him famous throughout the West, but he'd never forgotten his roots. His wife, Isabella, a fellow artist, sat sketching the family scene while their 2 children played at her feet. Matthias had built the family's business interests into a financial empire, supported by his brilliant wife Dorothy and their 4 children, and Evander. Their baby, who was now 35, had surprised everyone by becoming a doctor. His wife, Sarah, worked alongside him at the clinic they'd built in town. And their 3 children were the current apples of their grandparents' eyes. "So you see," Magnolia concluded, her voice carrying across the porch, "sometimes the most wonderful things come from the most impossible challenges." "At Grandmama," piped up 6-year-old James, Augustus's son, "why did you want 10 sons instead of daughters too?" Magnolia's smile was radiant as she gestured to the women scattered around the porch, 10 daughters-in-law who had become the daughters of her heart, plus 16 granddaughters who kept the family on their toes. "Oh, my sweet boy, I got my daughters too. I got exactly what I needed, even if I didn't know it at the time." As if summoned by her words, Caspian appeared at the bottom of the porch steps, his face glowing with the same love that had sustained them through 50 years of marriage. "Mrs. Ironwood," he said formally, extending his hand with a theatrical bow, "would you do me the honor of this dance?" The family cheered as Magnolia rose gracefully and took his offered hand. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon the entire porch became an impromptu dance floor, as couples paired off and children ran between the dancers. Shrieking with laughter, as Magnolia spun in Caspian's arms, she marveled at the life they'd built. Together, 50 years ago, she'd been a bitter woman who measured worth in impossible standards. Now she was surrounded by a legacy of love that would continue for generations. Any regrets? Caspian asked, echoing the question he'd posed on their wedding night so many years ago. Magnolia looked around at their extraordinary family, 10 sons who had grown into honorable men, daughters-in-law who brought new joy to every gathering, 32 grandchildren who filled their golden years with laughter and purpose. Just one, she said solemnly. Caspian's eyebrows rose in surprise. What's that? Her smile was pure mischief, the same expression that had first intrigued him in that long-ago saloon. I should have demanded 20 sons. Think of all the grandbabies we're missing. Caspian's laughter boomed across the prairie as he spun his beloved wife under the star-filled sky. Around them, their impossible dream continued to grow and flourish. Proof that the greatest love stories begin with the most unlikely challenges. As the music played and the family danced, Magnolia whispered against her husband's ear, "Thank you for giving me everything I never knew I wanted." "Thank you for being worth every impossible demand," he replied, his voice thick with emotion, and under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by the legacy they'd built together. Magnolia and Caspian Ironwood celebrated not just 50 years of marriage, but a lifetime of proving that true love really can conquer all, even the most impossible challenges.